Hey everybody. The discourse on lowering the difficulty in challenging games, particularly in the Souls-like genre, has been going up over the years. There was a pretty big spike with the release of Elden Ring, then another one last year with the release of Shadow of the Erdtree expansion, and now again with the release of Lies of P expansion Overture, which also included a patch that added difficulty options to the base game. Additionally, the first Berserker Kazan and Death Stranding 2 have also added to this conversation this year due to difficulty options added to Kazan and a whole option to entirely skip boss fights in Death Stranding 2. Honestly, Death Stranding 2 has nothing to do with the challenging Souls-like games at all. The challenge in that game is of a completely different nature, and if the second game is anything like the first, then the boss fights are total jokes anyway that nobody needs a skip button for. The boss fights were easy and tedious, just run around and throw some grenades or shoot some blood rounds at usually big creatures that hardly ever attack you. Regardless of that though, game journalists still use this in order to further push this notion of a utopia in gaming, their words not mine, where boss fights will be fully skippable. And of course this would make game journalists salivate because the entire gaming news industry has been totally appropriated by completely out of touch activists who don't even play video games to begin with anymore. I have no idea how this happened to the game's media, honestly. It's kind of mind-boggling that it did, but the meme has been around for well over a decade now and it's more and more realistic with each passing year, so the easier the better for them. But at some point, honestly, I think it's just too much and they're just going beyond the point for the sake of inciting more arguments online. Literally just doing it for rage bait purposes by presenting ridiculous ideas as must-dos for the industry, such as completely skipping any activity in the game that presents even the smallest bit of challenge, as it is with boss fights in Death Stranding, which is an already naturally easy game with a very easy difficulty option available. That option alone makes this game totally infallible. When that's not enough, and you still need buttons to skip activities, at some point you're straight up not even playing the games that you're spending upwards of $70 on. Overall, this discourse of difficulty options in Souls-like games and other more challenge-driven games like that usually gets way too heated online, and so I wanted to break it down, going over the things that make it useful and reasonable, the things that might pose a danger to the genre, and the things that are unequivocally destructive to it. So let's just jump right in there. So, on the surface of the issue, I am a very chill guy, so when Lies of P announced that they were doing this and releasing it soon, I wasn't one of the folks criticizing this decision online. The reason is because I don't feel that strongly at some studios doing whatever it is that they want to do. I don't see it as a thing that is immediately correlating with this slippery slope, even though I do see the possibility of a slippery slope happening, especially because of the game's media and how they immediately get cranking out articles loaded with these false data points such as, oh, many players agree that this is a W feature. Meanwhile, there is no such thing as many players agreeing with anything, as there's never any history of any polls that they're doing asking these communities anything. This false journalism, which is actually more akin to activism, is what can pose a problem with this becoming an industry-wide trend where studios should follow along with bending and breaking their Souls-like games with a total restructuring of how difficulty works in their games and adding options in the name of inclusivity, because if they don't, then they're essentially going to be looked at in a negative light. This is why I hate this kind of activism in the industry. It forces people to toe the line under implied negative connotations where if you just wish to have your own personal Souls-like experience beautifully crafted from the ground up with an intended way to be experienced and without any alternate modes that make it artificially easier, then you will suddenly be seen as a prick who stands against inclusivity, potentially even seen as a hater of the disabled or some crazy shit like that, when in reality you're just trying to make your own game your own way. We can already see this sort of thing happening in other weird ways, like last year for example when Black Myth Wukong was given lower ratings and attacked for a perceived lack of inclusivity, and Stellar Blade was attacked for a perceived attack on women. You either toe the line and go along with what these people regard as the correct choices in game design, be that mechanical, artistic, or narrative, or you risk going on their shit list, get given lower critic scores, be the target of ridiculous malicious articles, and potentially even get snubbed at the Game Awards. But all of this aside, like if we were in a normal games industry, far, far away from all of this garbage, all of this ideological lunacy, I would not feel at all slighted by a random Korean studio thinking about adding difficulty options to their Souls-like game, or different features that change the formula and often result in easier experiences, as we've seen in some other games like Stellar Blade, the Jedi games, and a few others. Because obviously not every game within this genre, or rather style, has to do that same thing and be that hardcore in terms of challenge, and for various reasons too. One of the most important ones is actually the fact that there's sometimes a total misconception from developers and people that we'll discuss on the last point of this video, who think the Souls-like genre is literally just, hey, let's make the game hard as balls, let's just make the player hit softer and the enemies hit harder, let's design batshit crazy boss fights with a bunch of AoE attacks, super delayed swings, and borderline stupid combos for the player to take out with nothing but a rickety old shield and a stick. You know, basically the Shadow of the Earth tree experience if you don't consume those skibbity tree fragments. Let's make a swamp level followed by another swamp level where the floor is lava and everywhere else is poison, you know? That kind of thing, without realizing how necessary it is to be really good at balancing the experience and creating enticing level design. I would rather have a Souls-like game with difficulty options than a Souls-like game with mediocre design that doesn't understand what it is trying to emulate. And the other simpler reason that developers have is they want their games to be more widely appealing, open to more people that would like to dip their toes into this sort of game without so much of the struggle. And I have no qualms with that either, but with that said, there's also a massive chunk of validity to the arguments against adding these difficulty options or making these games easier, and a lot of it is psychological, and with that comes its own set of problems. It's very easy to look at people who argue against difficulty options in Souls-like games and just think that they're a bunch of toxic assholes being rude and insensitive and gatekeeping the hobby, or at the very least gatekeeping a group of games. But I genuinely understand where they're coming from, and I want to try to explain what the mindset is and how it actually has nothing to do with people being toxic or gatekeeping anything. In fact, the Souls-like community is incredibly open and helpful to anyone who chooses to take up the mantle and dive into these challenging games. Oh sure, there's some assholes in there, every community has them, but they're only oppositional to those who want to come in from the outside with demands for changes, modernizations, and standardizations that would effectively dilute the experience of Souls-like games, which we'll get to after this point. These games and these communities hit different because they're unique, and I believe that they're unique because they're composed of several people who all went through the same experience, the challenge, the struggle, and the overcoming of it, alongside the wacky, funny stories of dying like 20 times to the same damn boss, or the memes of scaring the crap out of newbies with a specific boss in the game, like for example how everyone was terrified of the day where they would have to fight Malenia in Elden Ring. These are all things that we all understand. And it's not just that we understand it because we've experienced it together in much the same way, barring a few small differences, like for example some people using summons and others not. It's also because it's extremely characteristic of the Souls-like experience. This is, hands down, a key factor of it, made even more prominent with the funny messages that you can find along the way as you play the games. Not just funny messages, sometimes even helpful messages, and bloodstains of people dying right in front of you by getting caught by some monster or some trap around a corner that you have to go through right now. Some people lean so much into this false notion that like we're all a bunch of what? Hardcore elite pro MLG gamers and we're gatekeeping our game from noobs? Brother, some of us are the noobs. We're not hardcore elite anything and we're not standing atop a mountain often keeping the weak out of our prestigious game. We're just normal gamers who like this experience and want to play it just as it is. Many of us are not breezing through these games, we're struggling against them. It's just that we choose to do so, because we like the content in the game. This is precisely what it was designed to do. We like the challenge that is presented, and we like the feeling of accomplishment when we beat it, while these other people are the total opposite. This is not something that pleases or appeals to them. The problem is that instead of turning around and playing something else like normal people, they advocate that this is bad. It's gatekeeping the genre. The genre should be more inclusive so that more people can play it. Like, what the fuck do you mean more people can play it? It's already there. It's ready to be played. You just don't like the experience. This is like complaining to FIFA that you don't like football, and as a basketball enjoyer, you are being gatekept from FIFA games. So now these games have to stop being all about football and be about basketball instead, or at least just add the option of basketball, regardless of how ridiculous that is and how much the developers have to change in the game in order to accommodate for that. This is utterly ridiculous, and yet it's a matter that is growing instead of dying down because it's attaching itself to this annoying trend of everything having to be politicized or a ideological statement in some way, shape or form, where again, if you're against it, then that means that you're against inclusion. It's lunacy, man. It's like getting mad at Battlefield for being a shooter instead of an action RPG, or being mad at Baldur's Gate 3 for being an RPG instead of a road paving simulator. If you don't like the core experience that the genre is constructed around, you should be moving the fuck on rather than trying to change what the experience is all about. This will obviously and justifiably cause backlash. Now, usually at this point in the conversation is when the point comes along that, oh, but this is just an option, and as an option you can ignore it and play the game in a harder difficulty. This has two types of ramifications that aren't being taken into account though. Number one is a bit harder to explain, and we'll talk about it right now, and the second one will be covered in the next topic, which has to do with mechanics. Okay, so let's see if I can get this across. When we all played Bloodborne and we had that first encounter with Father Gascoigne, it was hard, it was wild, and it was awesome, and we all experienced the same thing. Some of us may have struggled a bit more, others a bit less. That's just an aside because at its core, we all have that unifying element. Same with Genichiro in Sekiro, which was sort of a rite of passage boss fight. It was either the boss fight where we became Sekiro fans, honing our skills and getting good, as the saying goes, to beat the bastard and then go on with our adventure, or it was the boss that broke us and made us drop the damn game. There were no ways of skipping these bosses, there were no ways of scaling down the difficulty and turning them into an accessible joke. There was this weird psychological thing, this sort of rite of passage where you're now part of this brother-sisterhood of sorts, where you faced these challenges, you died and you died again, and yet you persevered and you came to enjoy these games for what they are, and perhaps even be an enthusiast of their dark fantasy lore and stories on top of that, which is unrelated to the point. The main thing is, you like this experience exactly the way that it was, and because of that, I also believe that future games that came around, like Sekiro itself and Elden Ring, they were good because this was the demand that the people had. This was what was growing the community. It was part of what developers had in mind in the creative process of new games in the genre, and it offers a unique kind of experience in the games industry. Literally unique, like this is where it is. This is the point of these games. This is why they are being made. This is what makes them special, and you don't find this kind of thing in any other game. That's why it's its own genre. It's like, hey, why do you like racing games? Well, because they're racing games. I'm sorry, it's just, it always ends up making me laugh when I start thinking about this again, because I don't understand how people don't understand this. This is a unique element that comes with these games, which many other games and communities also have. Like, for example, it's going to be a bit cringe, but it's going to make sense. Shipping games. These games have incredibly tight-knit communities with their goddamn languages, memes, inside jokes, and temperament that is unique to them. They attract certain kinds of people, and don't none of them want any goddamn pricks to come in and taint them with, oh, but I think this is inappropriate, oh, but I think this is enabling this or that, oh, but this could be designed this or that way. Like, none of that is acceptable. They want these games as they are, and whenever developers screw up on a sequel or whatever by, I don't know, mischaracterizing a character or ruining a ship, They let them know with fire and fury. And as another example, we can look at the downfall of games like Call of Duty. Shooters like these used to have a certain vibe to them, which was incredibly inviting to people who wanted to take part in that culture, for lack of a better word. They were fast, gritty, and competitive military first-person shooters that played a lot into being appealing to their male audiences. They didn't trivialize their warlike settings and military atmosphere the way that they do now, because they had a target audience that kept them in the money. And ever since Call of Duty and others began diversifying their appeal, inviting these dogshit elements that were maybe fitting in other games but definitely not in Call of Duty, you know, like stupid Fortnite coded skins that nobody asked for, DLC packs to play as Nicki Minaj or Seth Rogen or recently Beavis and Butthead, you know, all this garbage, there has been a decline. Call of Duty doesn't have the prestige, the quality, or the appeal it once had. They've gone so far now that I don't think that they can even ever go back, because even if they did, they probably wouldn't get back all of the fans that they lost. When you change key factors of a game or franchise's core experience, you will inevitably change the very player base, community, and eventually even identity of that franchise. It just is what it is. It's a reality. You can look at Fallout and Elder Scrolls as examples of that. So is it really that difficult to understand why Souls-like fans have such an invested desire in preserving that? I don't think so at all. And I don't see the toxicity in it either. I see more toxicity in those wanting to invade a space that they don't like and change it under false premises. At the end of the day, this isn't even about difficulty on its own. It's much more about the preservation of these genre-defining qualities that are unique to these games and the type of players that they invite, which of course play into the kind of communities that they form. Now, with that out of the way, can I actually be 100% sure that the introduction of these difficulty options is going to break these communities and subsequently these games? That's where my dilemma comes from. That's why when I saw Lies of P doing this decision, I didn't immediately jump to criticize it, because I'm not sure about this specifically. And I actually look to Lies of P as a good sort of lab rat type of thing where we can now see it play out to see what ends up happening. We can see if it actually works and brings in new players into the fold that get introduced to this genre, like it, and want to play more games in the same style, thereby assimilating with the community, or if they do the opposite and still complain about many other facets of these games, like complaining that the bosses are too hard, so they want a skip button, or the level design is too strict and linear, so they want more open areas and verticality and double jumps and sprint buttons and so on so forth, which would only further water down the genre. But I also don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom. Personally, the first time that I played a Souls game, which was Dark Souls back on the 360, I hated it. I couldn't stand the damn thing. I couldn't understand it either. Why was it so hard? Where's the NPCs to talk to? Where's the world map and shit? Where's the quest log? I backed out before I even left the goddamn asylum. But then I played Bloodborne and this one hit different. Something about the setting just made me want to persevere. I was also a bit older, wiser, and more patient. I still sucked though, and so I used help from a channel that did these beautiful guides. The channel name was Epic Name Bro. He got me into Bloodborne and got me to return to Dark Souls and play through that as well. Sadly, his playthroughs are gone though, I don't know why. They were content gold because he knew what he was talking about. He had actually been commissioned or invited or whatever to work on the official guide of Bloodborne, and the videos were beautifully made. Through that little bit of help in Bloodborne, I ended up a huge fan that has played every single other game except for Dark Souls 2 and many more that aren't made by FromSoft. Perhaps introducing people to Lies of P with an easier difficulty setting will help welcome new people, give them a taste of the goods per se, and encourage them to play more of these games. This would be the positive scenario. But now, sadly, we have to get negative again and talk about the bad news, of which there are plenty. While I don't know whether or not an isolated case of a difficulty setting in Lies of P will be enough to break its community and start a revolution of Souls-like developers obsessing with dialing down the difficulty in their games, What I do know for sure is that if this becomes a trend, through that aforementioned slippery slope with the help of the media, it will break the very games that we love. When people fixate on this issue of difficulty options, they are completely misunderstanding the way that these games get made. It shifts the entire attention towards this concept of an easy mode that is separate from a supposed normal or harder mode, when in reality, this is just not at all how these games were designed to begin with. Certainly not the good ones. Games like Dark Souls and other truly great Souls-like games were made with this sort of dynamic difficulty in mind, where some areas are meant to be easier, others are meant to be more challenging but fair, others are meant to be harder because they wish to teach the player some specific mechanic or playstyle to tackle similar challenges in later areas of the game, or maybe a specific boss. Other areas are meant to be straight up nightmares, some of which are supposed to be returned to later when we're stronger to show progress, and others are just hellholes. They are hellholes that we're not meant to be in. We're not meant to engage if we know what's good for us, we're just meant to run through them and not look back. Like the Tomb of the Giants in Dark Souls. It's pitch dark, the enemies are tough and numerous, you're not meant to fight through it, you're just meant to run and hope that you don't lose your way or fall into a trap. And for example, New Londo is an impossible area to go to unless you use a sacred weapon or a blessed weapon, something like that. I'm sorry guys, it's been a few years since my last playthrough, but yeah, unless you have a weapon like that, the ghosts in there are just going to massacre you because nothing else works on them. And honestly, even with a sacred weapon, that cursed place is not meant to be a cakewalk. Ghosts are meant to be a constant, unpredictable threat coming at you from literally any direction as their bodies pass right through solid objects. They claw at you from underneath, from above, and forget about them hiding behind corners because they'll just charge at you right through a wall. Hell, you're not even meant to go there early in the game, even though it's one of the first areas that you can visit if you happen to go the wrong way. Areas like these tell stories all on their own just based on how dreadful they are and the kinds of emotions that they evoke on the player going through them. You're not able to fucking eat some Cheetos while checking your notifications on your phone and swinging aimlessly on easy mode, getting rid of some pesky pointless little ghosts that will just have you annoyed like, ugh, another one of these things. You're meant to be on the edge of your seat, your full attention on your surroundings and ears pricked up for every sound, especially as your Estus flasks run out. Which brings me to two other things, enemy design and Estus flasks. A lot of enemies in Souls-like games, especially the earlier ones, but also visible in other games like Lies of P for example, are boring. Yeah, just boring. They are often slow already, they telegraph their movements, they only have a few attacks, and there aren't really that many of them around. They're engaging because the game isn't easy or particularly fast, and so every encounter matters, because when they hit hard. But if you take this aspect away, then what you're left with is boring enemies. And regarding healing flasks, are they just going to be unlimited now in these supposed easy modes, or are they going to be straight up pointless as the difficulty mode makes enemies into jokes that are easy to kill? Because that's already another way that difficulty is brilliantly dynamically manipulated in these games. If you've got 0 heals left, everything is dialed up to 11, your focus is sharp, you have very little room for mistakes, and there's an increasing level of tension building up that explodes into pure relief when you turn a corner and find a bonfire. Then you rest, replenish your healing flasks, and guess what? Now the area is a joke to you. You go out there and you fight those monsters and explore to find those extra treasures because the difficulty has dynamically and naturally lowered itself by you finding a checkpoint. Sure, maybe you might die to some tough enemies, but you're going to respawn just a few meters away, ready to go pick up your souls and continue exploring whatever you were exploring. Lies of P even added to this mechanism by giving you the ability to charge up an additional heal by hitting enemies, giving players this sort of risk and reward factor to engaging in fights whenever they are out of healing flasks. I'm sorry, but if you purposefully dumb down a game's difficulty and challenge, all of these cool elements are gone with the wind. I could also go into Sen's Fortress, for example, and how that entire place is meant to be this sort of proving ground for any player wanting to reach an Orlando in which there is a notable difficulty jump. Places like Sen's Fortress are not meant to feel easy, it's just antithetical to the actual location. The moment a place like that is easy, it turns to shit. Immediately there's a problem with the level design of the place because, I mean, look at it. It's a goddamn joke. Narrow walkways, random swinging blades, a few douchey enemies hanging around. What is this, a PlayStation 1 game? But the reason it works is because it forces you to take it slow. Save your healing items, be wary of traps, be wary of enemies behind corners, and mindful of your environment. Sans Fortress without the difficulty is just a terribly designed and outdated platforming sequence. And it also loses its narrative significance, creating a terrible dissonance between what that place is meant to be in the lore versus what we're actually experiencing while playing. And oh my god, can we talk about Blighttown? You're not meant to be having a good time in there, man. When I found out that the best way to get through Blighttown is by poisoning myself, I had a really good moment just laughing on my own because it's just such a ridiculous thing, but yeah, it's true. If you poison yourself with a controlled substance, it will do less damage to you over time than if you get affected by the poison that the enemies in that area carry. And this opens up a whole other universe of crafty ways that the Souls games play around with their mechanics in order to offer secretive, wacky, and creative ways of getting through difficult areas or defeating tough bosses. I already feel kind of sad whenever a new Souls-like type of game comes out and it's missing all of these cool, creative little things and just providing a surface-level copy of Souls-like elements with a cranked-up difficulty, you know, just watered-down versions of it where the design is linear and the enemies just hit harder than you. It just feels cheap and uninspired. Now imagine a world where these things are just going to have to be completely gone because developers will mainstreamify these games to appeal to game journalists and people like DSP and others who are verging very closely to turning game difficulty into yet another fucking culture war issue where there's only two sides to it. The good and correct side, which is to praise it and apply it to every game in the most ridiculous way possible, ushering in a utopia of skippable boss fights. And then the bad and bigoted side of saying no, stop it, this is bad, it's only going to further uniformalize video games, as if we didn't already have such a huge problem with this already, where once upon a time linear, unique, creative video games would have been fine being developed, whereas now, and especially during the last console generation, nearly everything needed to be yet another big open world action game with question marks everywhere on the map for you to go find. Basically, Ubisoft clones all over the damn place. There's so much that difficulty and the way that difficulty is designed can impact games in. Level design can't be done the same way. Enemies can't be programmed and animated the same way. True enemy variety will either be gone or just be pointless as everything goes down the exact same way, by just hitting it enough times. Know what I mean? Stuff like this can't be excused with, but it's optional, because the implication of an option has already killed creative design. For example, if you have an enemy in the game that is hard or even impossible to kill by just whacking it, but much easier to parry, break the posture, and then doing some kind of execution attack on a weak spot, this will already not be viable in a game because developers will have to take into account people who can't parry. Suddenly, an interesting enemy with a particular way of taking it down has to be reduced to yet another whack-a-mole type of enemy where players playing on easy have to give it like 3 whacks and players playing it on normal or harder have to give it a few more. And that's just one basic surface level example of how creativity can get impacted. It's just lame, man. Cool crafty ideas will just be replaced by more conventional, standardized slop. Either that or development time and resources will have to go up because developers will be forced to design 2 different games basically. An interesting one and then the same one but dumbed down to holy hell so that it can provide an easier experience. This shit is just not going to be viable and I don't see it happening. I mean, look around. We already have a big problem in AAA with budgets being inflated to fuck and they're only making one version of their games. And since we're on this hypothetical train, I also don't see the passion in it. And then I also don't see a world where 2 distinct versions of the same game exist and get reviewed the same way. Know what I mean? If brilliance is hidden away in some intended game mode that game journalists are not going to bother to play because they're f***ing retarded, then they're not even going to be able to take into account all of these details in their reviews or in their Game of the Year choices. I just don't like the way that sounds at all, and why this is such a difficult situation to navigate. On one hand, a couple games going a different way and adding difficulty settings doesn't hurt me or anyone at all. In fact, in several games it may even be a good idea. But this shit is becoming a thing. You read these articles from these journals and you can see the narrative being woven already going back a few years, becoming more prevalent and realistic as time passes and getting some games in the genre to already make these changes, which now prompts the ones that don't to be looked at as problematic. If these decisions are being made because of creative freedom, I am perfectly fine with it. I just don't like it if they're being made because of a creative restriction. And sadly, that's what sounds more like what's happening. A lot of gamers like to be challenged when playing something. Challenge can come in various ways across various genres, and I'm sorry, but no, the solution to that isn't with adding a fucking difficulty option called hard, because that's just going to water down game development by the very reasons that we just touched on. You can only make so many hard games where enemies are just hard because they hit really hard and your health bar is small, until people are sick and tired of the gimmick while hungering for the days where this genre played with difficulty in brilliant, creative and dynamic ways because they were free to do so within a big variable spectrum of difficulty, instead of being hindered by an arbitrary rule that will heavily narrow that down and put difficulty on a straight line, completely destroying dynamic difficulty, interesting and playful level design, and utter nightmare areas where you're not even meant to go to unless you're a masochist or a speedrunner. This is what is at stake. This is why people get concerned whenever this discourse comes back up. It's not because we're rude, it's not because we're insensitive, monstrous gatekeepers who hate disabled people. It's got nothing to do with that, and in fact, that rhetoric is literally false, and anyone who spreads it should be ashamed of themselves. And those who fall for it need to do better, because they're literally emotionally manipulating you into believing the stupid-ass notion that disabled people can't play a goddamn video game like everyone else and find the same joys in beating challenges as all of those who do as well. At the end of the day, gaming is for everyone, but not every game is for everyone. As someone who loves Souls-like combat, I can't go and demand the creator of Stardew Valley to put that in his game so that I can feel included. As someone who hates playing horror games but loves watching them, I can't go demand horror games to take the stressful parts out. And similarly, visual novel enthusiasts can't go demanding action games to strip the damn action out. It would be insanely narcissistic for people to do so. Some games are just meant to be hard. They're meant to push you to your limits and then have you overcome them. They're not meant to be a breeze. They're just not designed that way. And these people who want to claim the genre for themselves under this false flag of inclusion are just being narcissistic assholes who aren't going to even play the damn games to begin with. If these games are already not their thing, making the core design and experience of the games objectively worse is not going to make it become their thing. We've already seen way too many times what happens to great studios who've gone down the idiotic road of deprioritizing their core audiences and communities to cater to outsiders under the same type of virtue signaling nonsense. This has happened over the past few years one too many times, ending up in the fall of great franchises because of it, and hell, even some full studio shutdowns. Oh sure, the games media will applaud you all the way down, but that doesn't really get you anything. And I just really hope that the Souls-like genre and those who make it are not about to go down that same road because of difficulty. But anyway, that's it from me on this one, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and if you're one of these 75% who aren't subscribed yet, consider doing so to support the channel and stay up to date with all my uploads. With that said, let me know what you make of all this. Are you okay with the difficulty options in these types of games, or are you a bigot? Be sure to let me know down below. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care of yourselves.